This is Andy from GPS Training. In this next video I'm going to show you how you amend and rename a turn-by-turn cycle route that you've created in Basecamp software. I've already got the software open, it's just minimized at the bottom of the screen, so I'm just going to double click on the Basecamp logo in my taskbar at the bottom of the screen just to open up the software. I'm using a route that I've created on a previous exercise, creating a turn-by-turn cycle route. So I've already got my GPS device connected, which I can see in the top left hand window under Devices, Oregon 700. In the Maps menu at the top I've got my Ordnance Survey Garmin GB Discoverer map selected, and also because I've been creating turn-by-turn cycle routes in the activity profile at the moment, rather than direct routing that we normally use for off-road walking routes with the OS maps, I've got one of the tour cycling activity profiles selected. It's a route that I'd already created in a previous exercise under a folder in my collection called Cycling. I have a subfolder called Northumberland, and within that folder I've got a Rothbury to Alnwick list file. You can see the route in the bottom left hand window as we left it from the previous exercise. It hasn't been renamed and it just has the generic name 020 from a point on the map to Clearport Street, which is where the route ended in the town of Alnwick. So the first thing I need to do is rename this route before we send it to the GPS, otherwise it'll appear in the GPS as the name that's generically being given from the map page. Two ways I can rename the route. I can just simply right click on the little symbol with the three green boxes and the cyclist, and on the drop down box that appears when I right click on there I get the option of rename. So I can select rename there and simply type in the new name. I'm keeping it quite short because it's the name that will appear on the screen of your GPS, so I'm just going to call that Roth to Alnwick. Just abbreviate it slightly, hit return. I've now renamed that route. Another way that I could have renamed the route is to double click on the actual route name in the bottom left hand window, and then we get a properties box open, and in this properties box that opens you can see the name at the top. We could have simply deleted the name that was in there, so I'll just delete that one by hitting the backspace. I'm just going to type in the same name again, but that's another place that you could rename the route from. So while we're on the properties box, I'm just going to look at the bottom of the properties box, just minimizing it so you can see it at the center of the screen. There's a little box ticked that says more info. Normally that box is unticked. I do recommend that you tick that more info box too, because you do see a lot more information about your route, i.e. grid references for any points that you've marked on the route, distances, etc. are then displayed on the properties box. So I'm just going to open up this properties box so it's full size again, and the important thing is in the summaries box at the top under properties we can see how many points this route has been made up of. It has what we call 4 via points. That is every time I clicked on the map page to create the route. It's what we also call shaping points. We used it to shape. The 7 points is just the number of points it's automatically put in for turns on the route, but the important bit is the via points, because there's a maximum number of via points that you can have on a turn-by-turn cycle route. On a direct walking route it was 250 when you just draw straight lines using the direct routing, but when you're using a turn-by-turn cycling, or if you've got mapping that lets you do turn-by-turn walking routes, it's the maximum number of via points. That's every time you click on the map page to create a point when you're creating a route, it's 50 number on a turn-by-turn route, otherwise it won't work in your handheld recreational GPS device. So we've got 4 via points, so we're absolutely fine there. It's well within the 50 number, and it also gives us information about distance here and elevation. If on this properties box we actually click on the route directions, we can see little arrow symbols. You wouldn't see them on a direct walking route, but when you're using a turn-by-turn cycle route, those arrows would actually appear on the screen of your GPS if you set your GPS up for turn-by-turn routing, also using one of the cycling route properties within your GPS device. So I'm just going to close this properties box down now that we've renamed the route. So we've now got this route renamed Roth to Alnwick. The next thing we're going to look at is the editing tools. It's the same tools that we used in the direct route amending on the previous exercise. So you can either go to your tools menu and you have the option of move point, insert and erase. I've got those tools added to the shortcuts at the top of the screen. If those tools are greyed out, it's normally because you haven't got a route highlighted. If I unhighlight a route and just go to the folder, those tools are greyed out, so you have got to be highlighted on a route for those tools to come into action. So you can either pick them from the tools menu, or if you want to add them to the shortcuts and they're not already there, you can select view, toolbars, and just make sure that in the, so just go back to that, view, toolbars, and make sure that the edit features box is ticked. If edit features isn't ticked, you won't have the shortcut for those tools. Now, a little bit different to when we amend a direct walking route, because this route automatically snaps on the roads. What you've got to be careful, if you start moving the shaping points around, it'll start drawing straight lines just onto the new roads that you're moving the shaping points onto. So the best way, if you want to adjust the way that your route goes, so I'm going to use the example now in the middle of the screen where I've got the shaping point at the junction here of a yellow road. I'm going to add a point somewhere in the middle here of the two shaping points from the end of the route and the one at this junction with the road. I'm going to add a point in the middle and then drag that point down onto a different road. It's always best to add an extra point and drag that point rather than trying to move an existing shaping point. If it's a point at the end of the route, it's fine, you can drag that route further, that point further up, but in the middle of a turn-by-turn route, you're always better to use the add point and then move that add point if you wanted to redirect the route in a slightly different way. So what I'm going to do now is select the add point, sort of the insert point. It's the little pencil with the black cross next to it. So if I select that insert point and then move it somewhere between the last leg of this journey and just left click, and then I have to drag the mouse and left click again where I want that new point to be. So I'm just going to show you again, left click on the straight line, drag the mouse down, so I'm dragging it down further down onto a different road, and then left click, and then that'll reshape that route to go via that different road and then take it back up onto the next road. Whenever you finish moving a point, I always recommend you go back to the hand tool to finish the action that you've just done. I'm going to use the edit undo now to show you how we can go back one step if you've made a mistake. So if I use the edit undo and go back one step, so we put the route back to how it was, and I'll show you that exact same action again. So we're going on to the insert point tool, moving that tool between the last leg of this route, left clicking anywhere on the straight line of the route, and then I'm just dragging that point by moving the cursor on the mouse to where I want that route to be redirected, and then left clicking to put the point on the road, and it redirects the route. If I select the hand tool again, what I can do is add another point in just to do exactly the same again. Use the insert, and if I just move it to a different point on the route, just a little bit further up, and then drag it further down, and just give it a chance to settle down, and again I've removed it. Now you do find sometimes, because it is trying to snap on roads, you can get funny things happen where it'll try and draw extra lines on the roads as it tries to snap. So the nice thing is, if you find you've got it reshaped but you end up with an extra leg that you don't want, this is a good example to show you. I'm going to select the hand tool again and just tidy up this route now. So I don't want this little leg now that's sticking out of the top, so I'm going to use the erase button. So it's the erase tool. Again, I could go to tools and select the erase, and then when I move the rubber symbol over the little black shaping points on the pink line, I can actually erase those points out that I don't want, and just let the route recalculate and do the next one. You get a little red cross when you move it on the black dot on the shaping point, and that's that route. Now it's taken out that leg that I didn't want, and I've now got the route reshaped slightly at the end. So it does take a little bit of playing about. It's not quite as simple as a direct route, because every time you move a point, it's looking for a road to snap on, and you can end up sometimes with a leg somewhere that you don't want. But the erase tool is always a good tool to use. That'll erase out any of the shaping points that are in the wrong place, or any legs that are in the wrong place, by simply putting the eraser symbol over one of the black shaping points. So if I look at the very end of this route now, I'm just going to move the map page across. So as I move the cursor to the right hand side of the screen, I get that white arrow which lets me move the map page across. Where I've got that black dot at the end which ends the route in Anik, if I left click with the eraser symbol on there, it'll take out that last leg down to the last shaping point. So that's again how you can take points out of a route. If you've made a mistake, you can simply use the edit undo, and that'll always take you back one step. The final thing I'm going to look at on this amending this route is how do you add on to the end of the route if you hadn't actually finished the route and need to go a bit further. What you can do is use the insert tool again. So if you use the insert tool, and if I move that onto the map page and just use the arrow up to move this map a little bit further up. So whenever you see the white arrow at the top of a screen or the edge of a screen, it'll let you left click with your cursor and move the map without accidentally marking a point or doing something that you don't want. So now I've got this little insert tool. If I move that so that I'm on the very last point of my route, so I'm just going to zoom out a little bit there. So just get it so it's right on the last point. So the little trick is, what you could probably see there, as I was moving it on the last part of my route, I was getting a black thin line appear between 2 points. You've got to make sure you get this black circle around the last point. So I'll now zoom right in on this. It's getting a black circle on the end, not if I move it a little bit away from that last point, I get this grey line. So you've got to make sure you're right on the very last point. Sometimes you find you've got to move the cursor away, bring it back. I'll just try and get that on there again. It's a little bit tricky sometimes just getting that to go on where you want it, so I'm just going to zoom out again. Yep, zoomed out there. I've now got it on the last point. If I left click now on the very last point, I've now got this pencil symbol and the little thin line at the end of my route. And just make sure again from the routing activity setting, I've got the cycling one selected. I can now add on a little bit extra to this end of this route by left clicking on the map page, and it's now let me add some extra bits to the end of the route. Again, as previously, when you finish doing something and you've still got one of the editing tools selected, just remember to select the hand tool to finish the route, and that's that route now amended, and I've added a bit onto the end of the route. If I double click on the properties box again in the left hand window here, we'll be able to see now I've actually got 9 via points. It's got 21 points in for the turns, including the via points on the route, but the actual via points is the important one. It's still within 50 points, which is well within the maximum 50 for a route. And if I look on the route directions now, we've got some extra arrows on there that'll appear on the screen of the GPS. So I'm just going to close that screen down and show you one other route that I've done earlier, just as an example to show you a longer route and explain about these via points again when we look at the maximum number of 50 points on a turn-by-turn route. So I've got another route in this list file called Rothbury to Berwick. So I'll highlight the Rothbury to Berwick. This one needs renaming as per the previous route, because at the moment it's just got a generic name taken from the map page. So this time I'm actually going to double click on the properties box to rename this one. So actually double click on the route name itself, and then it opens up the route properties box, and in the box along the top I'm just going to rename this one Roth to Berwick, just abbreviating it slightly so it's a shorter name in the GPS. Hit return. What we can see in this route, it's actually got 105 points, but it's got 48 via points. That's still within the 50, so that's absolutely fine. It's not 50, so don't get confused with the number of points. It's this number of via points, how many times I actually clicked on the map page to make this route. So it's a route that's 110 kilometers, so it's a fair distance to use up 48 points. Now bear in mind, I've clicked a lot of places on the map here where I probably didn't need to, just to a lot of via points to show the example that you can get up to 50 points. If you were to click on the map page a start and end point over a big distance and let the system itself calculate the route, it's only actually classed as 2 via points, so you'd be well within the 50 points. One thing you can do if you find you have got a route that is over the 50 points, you can convert that route into a track. The reason you can then convert it into a track to work in the GPS. A track can actually have 10,000 points in it. One thing to bear in mind when you do convert something to a track, it will increase the points drastically from what you've already got. So I'm just looking at maybe a route that you've created that's got 60, 70, 80, 90 points in. So we're not into the hundreds, but that's too many for the GPS to cope with. And if you can't remove points that you've put in, you can convert it into a track. The one thing you will lose if you convert it into a track, you won't be able to follow the turn-by-turn arrows in the GPS. It will simply be a pink line on the screen of your GPS. So if I did want to convert this one to a track, I'm just going to close the properties box down. Where we've actually got the route in the bottom left hand window, if I right click on that route, there's an option in the drop down box called create track from selected route. So if I select that create track from selected route, what you'll see if we give this about 5-10 seconds, underneath the name where it says Rothbury to Berwick route, we've now got a little footprint symbol, and it's shown me that it's now been converted to a track as well. If I double click on that track just to open up the properties box, it's actually got 2,123 points in it, so it's a lot of points, but it's still within 10,000 points that a track can have. So if you do have a route that's just over the 50 points and you don't want to go and erase any points, you could convert it into a track. But to be honest, what I tend to find is the easiest to do, if I go back to this Rothbury Berwick one and just double click on it so that we get it on the screen, and if I zoom right in, you'll be able to see as I zoom right in the little shaping points that were used when I created the route, these little black dots. So what I could do, where I've put in black dots where they probably weren't needed, I could go back to the erase tool and select the erase tool from the tools, and with the erase tool selected, we could erase some of these points out of the route. You just got to be careful you're not erasing them at junctions. It could be points that you've just put in as you were snapping the route up the map page that aren't necessarily needed. So if I go into the tools menu and select the erase and just erase a couple of points here that you can see on the screen, let the route recalculate, which is what it's doing now on the screen. It hasn't changed the shape of that route because those points weren't at junctions. So I'm just going to erase one more point just to show you how you could take some points out after you've done a route to get it under the 50 number. So that one was 48 points before. If I now double click on that route, the via points are now 46. So there is a way, if you're just over the 50 points, you could use the erase button. Just be careful though, if you do erase a point that you put at a crucial junction, it could change the shape of your route to what you were wanting to go and the way that you were wanting that route to go. So I hope you found that useful on how you amend a turn-by-turn route. It is a little bit more trickier than a direct route, but there is tools there that you kind of use to change the route. And the important thing to remember, maximum number of 50 via points in a turn-by-turn cycle route or a turn-by-turn walking route if you have the type of mapping that lets turn-by-turn walking routes. Thanks for watching this video.